This is a true story, something that happened to me not too long ago. It's funny how you can dedicate a decade of your life to building something, only to have it all taken away in a single moment, over a steak you can't even bring yourself to eat. The weight of the leather-bound portfolio in my lap was the only thing that felt real. Inside was the culmination of 6 months of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled strategy sessions. The winning proposal for the Aperture account, the biggest client in our firm's history. Across the starched white tablecloth at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, my boss, Arthur Vance, raised a crystal glass of Macallan 25, his smile as polished and expensive as his Patek Philippe watch. "To the future," he toasted, his eyes twinkling at the assembled team, my team. Then his gaze settled on me, and with a voice dripping in false magnanimity, he delivered the line that shattered my world. "And to Clara, whose incredible work has paved the way for my nephew, Julian, to take the lead as our new Senior Vice President of Strategy. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows." The clinking of glasses around the table was deafening, a chorus of polite congratulations that sounded like nails on a coffin. My coffin. My blood ran cold, the prime rib on my plate turning to ash in my mouth. Senior Vice President. My title. The position I had bled for, the one Arthur had promised me just last week upon securing this very account. I looked from Arthur's smug, placid face to the kid sitting beside him. Julian Vance, 26 years old, with a soft, unlined face, a limp handshake, and an MBA from a third-tier university that his father's donation had surely secured. He'd been an intern for the last 2 months, mostly shadowing me, asking inane questions and spending most of his time scrolling through his phone. He offered me a small, condescending smirk, a silent acknowledgement of the coup. He knew. They all knew. The entire dinner wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. My execution. The rest of the evening was a blur of forced smiles and hollow pleasantries. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, some pitying, some triumphant, all curious to see if I would break. I held it together, a marble statue of professionalism, even as my insides were churning with a toxic cocktail of shock and incandescent rage. I shook Julian's hand, my nails digging into my own palm. "Congratulations," I said, my voice unnervingly steady. "You have big shoes to fill." His smirk widened. "Don't worry, Aunt Clara," he said, using the mock-affectionate nickname he knew I despised. "I'm a fast learner." Arthur clapped him on the back, beaming like a proud father. "He's a Vance," he declared to the table. "It's in the blood." The next morning, the reality of the betrayal hit with the force of a physical blow. My spacious corner office on the 44th floor of the Aon Center, the one with the panoramic view of Millennium Park and Lake Michigan, was being packed up. My assistant, a sweet girl named Maya, looked at me with tears in her eyes as 2 men from facilities loaded my life's work into cardboard boxes. "They're moving you to the 28th floor," she whispered, as if the walls themselves were listening. "It's smaller." Smaller was a generous term. My new office was a windowless cubicle, a beige box tucked away in the back corner of the archival department, smelling faintly of stale paper and regret. The official story, spun with Arthur's signature brand of corporate doublespeak, was that I was being moved into a specialized senior advisory role, a position created just for me to leverage my deep institutional knowledge. It was a lie so transparent it was insulting. I was being put out to pasture. Buried alive. My name was removed from the senior leadership page on the company website, replaced by a glossy, professionally shot photo of Julian, who looked like a frat boy playing dress-up in his father's suit. The first week was pure, unadulterated humiliation. People I had mentored, people whose careers I had built, now averted their eyes in the hallway. The invitations to strategy meetings stopped. My email traffic dwindled to a pathetic trickle of company-wide spam. I was a ghost haunting the halls of the empire I had helped build. Arthur, in a masterstroke of passive-aggressive cruelty, would CC me on emails praising Julian for minor accomplishments that were, in fact, the lingering results of my own projects. Great work on the Q3 projections, Julian. Your fresh perspective is already making waves. One such email read. I had written those projections 2 months ago. But through the haze of anger and despair, a cold, hard suspicion began to crystallize. It started with small things. A client I had a close relationship with, the CEO of a major logistics firm, sent me a text. Hey Clara, tried calling your old line. The new kid, Julian, is a bit green. Had a few questions on the supply chain integration strategy we discussed. Can you chat? I told him I was no longer on the account and directed him back to Julian. An hour later, I saw Julian rush past my cubicle, sweating, on his way to Arthur's office. Then came the bigger cracks. I still had residual access to some of the shared network drives, an oversight the IT department hadn't caught yet. Call it morbid curiosity, but I started looking. I found the presentation deck for the quarterly review with Northwood Industries, one of our most stable, long-term clients. It was my deck. My slides, my data visualizations, my strategic framework, verbatim. He hadn't even bothered to change the custom footer with my initials. He was a parrot, mimicking my work without understanding any of it. He was a fraud, and Arthur was his enabler. The real discovery, the one that turned my simmering rage into a focused, diamond-hard resolve, came late one Tuesday night. I was working late, mostly out of habit, when I decided to do a deep dive into the archived email server. I was looking for old contracts, but I typed in a different search query on a whim. My own name, in combination with Julian's. A single email thread popped up, dated 3 months prior. The subject line was Vance Legacy Transition. My blood turned to ice. It was a chain between Arthur, his brother, Julian's father, and 2 of the firm's board members. The words blurred together, a venomous script detailing my own demise. Clara has been indispensable in growing the firm to this point, Arthur had written. She's built a formidable machine. Now it's time for Vance to drive it. They discussed how to leverage the Aperture deal as the perfect juncture for the switch. They talked about my passion being a double-edged sword, framing my dedication as emotional instability, a potential liability. She's a brilliant workhorse, one board member commented, but she's not family. The final email from Arthur was the one that sealed my fate and my future. We'll create a new role for her, something to keep her on the shelf, but out of the way. With her non-compete clause, she'll have nowhere to go. She'll be neutralized. Neutralized. Not fired, not let go. Neutralized. Like a threat. Like an enemy combatant. They hadn't just replaced me. They had conspired to trap me, to ensure I couldn't take the skills and relationships I had built and use them elsewhere. They wanted to own me, to keep me locked in a beige box on the 28th floor until I withered into irrelevance. I sat there in the humming silence of the empty office, the glow of the monitor illuminating the stark truth. The shock was gone, replaced by a clarity so profound it was almost serene. They thought they had buried me. They didn't realize they had just planted a seed. My resolve wasn't just to leave. It was to tear down everything Arthur Vance had built, brick by stolen brick. And I would use his own arrogance as the bulldozer. This was no longer about a job. It was about reclaiming my life's work. The war had begun. My first move was to find a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the sharpest, most predatory shark I could find in the concrete jungle of downtown Chicago. I found him in a sleek, minimalist office on Wacker Drive. His name was Marcus Thorne, a man in his 50s with a reputation for eviscerating non-compete agreements. He listened to my story without interruption, his face impassive as I laid out the timeline, the emails, the calculated humiliation. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This isn't just a breach of faith. This is a textbook case of constructive dismissal. They created an intolerable work environment to force you out of your contracted role without formally terminating you. They wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted your brain on a shelf and your ambition in a cage." He picked up my employment contract. "Arthur wrote this himself, didn't he? It's filled with hubris. And loopholes. He pointed to a specific clause. It was dense with legalese, but the gist was that the non-compete was only enforceable if the company upheld its end of the bargain regarding my title and responsibilities. By demoting me to a phantom role, they had voided the very chains they thought would bind me. "We can fight this and win," Marcus said. "But a lawsuit is loud and slow. You want to hurt him, you do it quietly. And fast." The plan we devised was simple in its elegance and brutal in its execution. I wouldn't sue. Not yet. I would resign. I typed up my resignation letter, short, professional, and effective immediately. I didn't send it via email. I hand-delivered it. I walked up to the 44th floor, past the gleaming reception desk and the hushed, busy open-plan office I had once commanded. I didn't knock on Arthur's door. I walked straight in. He was on the phone, laughing. He saw me, and his smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Julian was in the office with him, feet up on the fine mahogany desk, scrolling on his phone. He didn't even look up. "Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through his phone call. He held up a finger, trying to dismiss me. I didn't move. I placed the letter squarely in the center of his desk blotter. "I'm resigning," I announced, loud enough for the entire senior floor to hear. "Effective immediately." Arthur's face went from annoyed to thunderous. He ended his call abruptly. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just resign, Clara. You have a contract." "My lawyer seems to think otherwise," I said, my gaze as cold as Lake Michigan in January. He called it a stunning piece of amateur arrogance. "Your words, I believe." Julian finally looked up, a confused, entitled scowl on his face. "You can't do that," he whined. "You're supposed to be advising me." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "Advise you on what, Julian?" "How to change the date on my old PowerPoint slides." I turned my back on them and walked out, the feeling of dozens of eyes on my back. It wasn't a walk of shame anymore. It was a victory lap. I could feel the shockwaves spreading through the office before the elevator doors even closed. That afternoon, I registered a new business entity with the state of Illinois. I called it Keystone Strategic Solutions. I was the sole employee. My corporate headquarters was the spare bedroom in my Lincoln Park condo. My first order of business wasn't to build a client list. It was to find a partner. I knew I couldn't dismantle Vance marketing from the outside, not alone. I needed an ally, someone with the resources and, more importantly, the motivation to see Arthur fall. That led me to Sterling Price, Vance Marketing's oldest and most bitter rival. Their CEO, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation, a fact that sources said deeply irritated Arthur, had been fighting him for market share for 2 decades. I didn't call the main line. I got her direct email from a former colleague and sent a single cryptic line. "I was the architect of the Aperture account. I know how to win it back. And I know how to get you the rest of them." 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Eleanor Vance," the voice on the other end said, crisp and commanding. "You have my attention. Be in my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow." The Sterling Price offices were a world away from Vance Marketing. Where Arthur's firm was all dark wood and old money swagger, Sterling Price was steel, glass, and hungry energy. Eleanor Vance was in her early 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She didn't offer me a job. I didn't want one. I offered her a deal. I would work as an independent consultant for Keystone Strategic. My fee would be a modest retainer, but my real compensation would be a significant percentage of the billing for any client I brought over from Vance Marketing. I was betting on myself. Eleanor listened, her fingers steepled. "You're proposing we weaponize you against your old boss," she stated, not as a question, but as an acknowledgement. "I'm proposing a mutually beneficial strategic partnership," I corrected. Arthur's greatest strength was my work. Without me, he's just a brand and a Rolodex. His entire client strategy for the next year is based on my projections and frameworks. Julian is trying to fly a 747 with a student pilot's license. It's going to crash. I'm just offering to be there to pick up the passengers. A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. "I like your style, Ms. Hayes. You're hired." The war of attrition began. I didn't go after the big accounts first. That would have been too obvious and put Arthur on high alert. I started at the bottom, with the smaller, high-maintenance clients I knew Julian would neglect. I knew their pain points, their budgets, their strategic goals. More than that, I knew them personally. I had sent gift baskets when their kids were born, attended their charity galas, and talked them through market downturns at 10 o'clock at night. I called them up not with a sales pitch but with a simple, "Hey, it's Clara. I've started my own consulting firm, and I'm partnering with Sterling Price. Just wanted to see how things are going." That's all it took. The floodgates opened. "Clara, thank God. This new kid doesn't know anything," one marketing director told me. "He missed a deadline last week. Arthur had to apologize personally." Another complained. "He presented us with a strategy that was completely irrelevant to the European market. It was like he didn't even read the brief." One by one they defected. Small accounts at first, but each one was a jab, a small cut in the Vance marketing empire. I made sure Eleanor's team gave them white-glove service, a stark contrast to the neglect they were experiencing under Julian. With each client that jumped ship, my case study grew stronger, and the whispers in the Chicago business community grew louder. Arthur tried to fight back. He had his lawyers send me a cease and desist letter, citing a non-solicitation clause. My lawyer Marcus sent back a 2-word response: "Be advised." Legally, Arthur had no ground to stand on. He started bad-mouthing me to mutual contacts, painting me as a disgruntled, unstable employee. But it backfired. My reputation for meticulous work and dedication was too strong. People knew me. They knew my results. All Arthur's slander did was make him look petty and weak. The true masterstroke, however, was a trap I had laid weeks before I even resigned. During my last days in that beige cubicle, I had spent my time archiving my old project files onto the central server. I knew Julian was lazy and would simply copy and paste my work rather than create his own. Tucked away in a folder labeled Q4 Projection Models, Master, was a beautifully complex Excel spreadsheet. It was a work of art, a predictive model I had built for long-term market penetration. It was also a Trojan horse. The model was designed to produce incredibly optimistic, impressive-looking results for the first 3 quarters. But buried deep within the macros was a subtle, cascading error in the algorithm that would only manifest in the long-term, year-end forecast. When it did, it would predict a catastrophic market collapse, making any strategy based on it look not just wrong, but suicidally reckless. It was a bomb, and I knew Julian would be the one to carry it right into the boardroom. I was just waiting for the right moment to detonate it. The moment was coming. The annual renewal pitch for the Aperture account, the crown jewel I had won and that Arthur had stolen. The day of the Aperture pitch felt like the climax of a film. Sterling Price had been invited to compete for the account, a direct result of Vance Marketing's fumbling over the past few months. The Aperture CEO, a shrewd man named Mr. Chun, was unhappy. Deadlines had been missed, and Julian's calls had reportedly been more about securing golf invitations than discussing strategy. We were the underdogs, the challengers, but I walked into that boardroom at the top of the Willis Tower feeling a calm, icy certainty. Eleanor was there, along with her top team. I was introduced simply as our lead strategic consultant. Arthur and Julian were already at the massive oak table, looking flustered. Julian was fiddling with his laptop, a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. Arthur was trying to engage Mr. Chun in some smooth old boys club chatter, but Chen's responses were clipped and cool. The air was thick with tension. They were presenting first. I took my seat, folded my hands, and watched the show. Julian started the presentation. As I predicted, it was my work. My slides, my market analysis, my graphics. He delivered it in a slick, rehearsed monotone, a young man wearing a suit of armor that was 3 sizes too big. He didn't understand the nuances of what he was saying. He was just reading a script. My script. Then he got to the final section, the 5-year forecast. He clicked to the slide displaying the beautiful, intricate charts from my Trojan horse spreadsheet. "As you can see," Julian said, puffing out his chest, Our proprietary model predicts an unprecedented 200% growth in the target demographic over the next 18 months, culminating in near-total market saturation by year 4. The numbers were, of course, spectacular. They were also a complete fiction. Mr. Chun and his board members leaned forward, looking intrigued. Arthur beamed, shooting me a triumphant, condescending smirk from across the table. He thought he had me. He thought he was proving that his nephew, his blood, was just as capable as the workhorse he'd put out to pasture. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor. When Julian finished, Mr. Chun looked at the screen for a long moment. "Those are very optimistic projections, Mr. Vance." "He's a visionary just like his uncle," Arthur boomed, clapping Julian on the shoulder. Then it was our turn. Eleanor gave a brief introduction, then ceded the floor to me. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, not with a presentation, but with a single-page handout for everyone at the table. It was a market volatility index report from an independent third-party analyst. "Thank you, Julian, for that presentation," I began, my voice even and calm. "The short-term market analysis is solid." I paused, letting the subtle compliment hang in the air, a final twist of the knife. "However, at Sterling Price, we believe in rigorous risk assessment for long-term planning. There are certain predictive models that, while seductive, can contain hidden flaws. For example, a common pitfall is failing to properly weight the decay variable in emerging markets, especially in the tech sector." I looked directly at Julian. "Julian, could you walk us through the core assumptions your model makes regarding the decay variable?" Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Julian's face went white. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He had no earthly idea what a decay variable was. He looked desperately toward Arthur, but his uncle was just as lost. Arthur knew how to sell, how to network, how to take credit. He didn't know the first thing about the complex analytics that underpinned the strategies I had built for him. "It's a proprietary metric," Julian stammered, shuffling his papers. "Of course," I said smoothly. "But surely you can explain its basic function? For instance, if the primary growth driver, let's say new user adoption rate, were to slow by even a fraction of a percent in Q3 of next year, how would your model's algorithm adjust the long-term forecast?" I was asking him to explain his own homework I had designed to be inexplicable unless you were its creator. He was drowning. His eyes darted around the room, pleading for a lifeline that wasn't there. Arthur tried to jump in. "What Clara is referring to is a highly technical aspect of the—" Mr. Chin cut him off, his voice sharp. "Let the young man answer, Arthur. He is your senior vice president of strategy, is he not? He should be able to speak to his own projections." All eyes were on Julian. The silence stretched for an agonizing 10 seconds. He finally looked down at the table, utterly defeated. I would need to consult the data team. I didn't even have to present our alternative strategy. The damage was done. In that single excruciating moment, everyone in the room saw the truth. Julian was an empty suit, a fraud. And Arthur, his proud sponsor, was a king with no clothes. The entire foundation of their pitch had crumbled into dust. Mr. Chin stood up. "Thank you for your time," he said, his voice laced with ice. He looked at Eleanor and me. "Ms. Vance, Ms. Hayes. My team will be in touch this afternoon to discuss the terms of our new partnership." We walked out of that boardroom, leaving Arthur and Julian sitting in stunned silence amidst the wreckage of their own arrogance. The news of Aperture switching to Sterling Price hit the Chicago business journals by the end of the day. It wasn't just a lost account, it was a vote of no confidence. And it was the first domino. The exodus became a flood. The other major clients, the ones who had been teetering on the edge, saw the Aperture news as their cue. My phone didn't stop ringing. One by one, they came over, each telling a new story of Julian's incompetence and Arthur's neglect. Vance Marketing was hemorrhaging its lifeblood. Their stock price, once a pillar of stability, began a steady, sickening slide. Within 3 months, the firm had lost nearly 40% of its client base, almost all of them now comfortably housed at Sterling Price, with me as their strategic lead. The board of Vance Marketing, the same men who had rubber-stamped my neutralization, finally panicked. They called an emergency meeting. They forced Arthur to step down as CEO, a move framed publicly as early retirement to pursue philanthropic interests. It was a pathetic, face-saving gesture that no one believed. Julian was fired a week later, quietly escorted out of the building with a box of his personal effects. The Vance legacy was over. The final, satisfying nail in the coffin came about 6 months after the Aperture pitch. I was leaving the Sterling Price building late one evening when I saw him. Arthur. He was standing on the other side of the street, just staring up at the gleaming tower where I now worked. He looked smaller. The tailored suit was still there, but the confident swagger was gone, replaced by the stooped shoulders of a defeated man. He looked hollowed out, a ghost haunting the city he once thought he owned. Our eyes met for a brief second across the rushing traffic of Wacker Drive. There was no anger in his gaze, just a kind of weary, bewildered recognition. He knew. He knew I had done this to him. I didn't smile or gloat. I simply held his gaze for a moment, then turned and walked away. A few months after that, Eleanor Vance called me into her office. Sterling Price had just posted its most profitable quarter in the company's history, a direct result of the accounts I'd brought in. She offered me a full partnership in the firm, a corner office on the top floor with a view that made my old one look like a postcard. I accepted. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm looking out over the glittering expanse of the Chicago skyline from my new office, I think about that portfolio I held in my lap at Gibson's, the one filled with the work he tried to steal. He didn't understand that he wasn't just taking a title or an account. He was taking my life's work, and that's a debt that can't be paid with a severance check. He built his legacy on my work. I just collected the debt with interest. The end.